Okay, well this is the first recording of our bold new adventure into the Struts framework. I'm recording this on Thursday the 10th of November when I should have been doing it in class yesterday, but there were some things not working about my project, which was extremely frustrating, and the books I had at hand and my Google searching were not helping me, but I did finally sort out the problem. It's somewhat odd. I'll point it out to you when we get to the area. It may not be in this lecture, it may be in the next one. But anyway, I think I have a working Struts-based program now that I can walk you through. And I have, as a result, posted Project 3 on the assignments area. I'm going to download it now. It is preliminary because I'm also having trouble incorporating Hibernate into my Struts application, and so I'm still doing some research on that. I have not actually used Hibernate with Struts 2 previously. So I'm getting to learn as you are you. Anyway, let's bring the preliminary spec down to our folder, and it's going to look very familiar, as you can already see from the name. I've decided to have an introductory project that is less complicated than the one I've been planning, and so this was a change of about a week ago as well. Anyway, we're going to go back to our ClubDB app and recast that for Struts. So the beginning part here is just the screens again to remind us of what the ClubDB app looks like. But I'm also going to recommend that we start again with the old version of the ClubDB, or at least that you have it on hand, that I posted with the first project that we did. And so we'll bring that down in a minute. And I also wanted to point out that I'm really not happy with any of the books that I ended up choosing as I get deeper into them. I actually prefer a book I used a few years ago when I taught Struts 2 the last time. It's been about 4 years now, and it was called Struts 2 in Action, one of the in action books. It was just a little bit more complete, but it was also more difficult to get through, and it hasn't been updated that I can tell. So that was frustrating. Anyway, my note there is that the Struts 2 for Beginners by Shaw and Shaw is essentially the book that I have at hand as I work through the project. So if you don't have that book, you might look at getting it. It's not that expensive. The Struts 2 project book with Hibernate 4 that is by the same authors was impenetrable and useless as far as I could determine when I started to look into it. So anyway, we're going to do the work we need to on our own in the lectures anyway. So you could probably get by without even having a Struts description, Struts book. But if you want one, that Shaw book is as good as any, which is not saying a lot. Okay, so the preliminary steps aren't going to mean a lot to you yet because you haven't seen how Struts is organized. It is a complete change in the way you think about the model view controller process. We've been using JSPs and servlets. So the JSPs are the view, our business classes are the model, and the servlet has been the controller. And what Struts 2 does is essentially replace the servlet. And it's going to be a little odd because it replaces the servlet, which is with something called an action, but the action has various connections and plugins that you can put into it. So we're going to take this slowly. I don't know how far we'll get in the remaining time, the remaining weeks we have in the course, but we'll at least give you an introduction to Struts. And in particular, it is Struts 2. There is still Struts 1 that is used, but Struts 2 is considered a fairly significant improvement, and most of the resources that I read suggested don't bother with struts 1 if you're just starting out. Go straight to struts 2. And so that's what we're doing. All right. So the clubdb.zip you may already have on your flash drive or wherever you're building your projects. That's what I would want you to download again as your reference. Now, we're not going to write code directly on top of it, but we will pull things out of it as we need to. I'm just needing to check and see if I have that on my drive. Yeah, let's see, 294. I don't think. I think that that clubdb is my updated one, so I'm good. I do have the zip file, so I'm going to need to copy that or open it up and pull it out again. So let me do that. It's the same thing, named the same thing. Let's see. This is clubdb. JPA, I think. I'm going to call it that for now. Okay, so with a new clubdb as a default starting point, we'll get that in place. All right, and now I'm ready to go to my NetBeans and start a project. So there are going to be some config files that go with struts, as well as these new sorts of Java source code. And struts 2 has a fairly high overhead on it. I'm not crazy about its runtime on our machines here, but we'll do what we can with it. So let's see, I've got clubdb already loaded, but that should be, if I look at the business, that, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not. Oh, that's because I changed the name on it. Okay. So yes, so clubdb that I have right now is the original Java 3 version of clubdb, and that's what you want. So if you've got a clubdb loaded in your NetBeans IDE that is the JPA assignment, you probably want to close that and reopen the raw or old style. Okay, so here we go. New project. It is a Java web application that we're building, and we're going to call it clubdb struts. It's what was my suggestion to you. And I have seen a lot of folks using the Glassfish server instead of Tomcat. I still like Tomcat, so I'm going to stay with that. EE7, clubdb struts looks good. And now our framework. So the change that happens first on the new project is that we want struts 2 as our framework. If you don't have the struts 2 framework, in fact, let me pause for a minute. If you don't have the struts 2 option in your frameworks, it's because you didn't download and install the plugins. We did that at the beginning of the course, so that's actually in the software setup lecture. But these were the plugins, the struts 2 plugin, the Xwork plugin, and the libraries. So those 3 are in a zip file that is on Blackboard, and you can get those, and you go through the Tools, Plugins menu, find the downloaded plugins and add them in. But that's how we had struts 2. Create example page? No, I'm not going to create an example page. The libraries registered 2.3.15, that's fine. Okay, so we're ready to finish. And we end up with, there's our libraries that have the struts. Now I also want to add the JDBC driver. So in my libraries, I'm going to right click and add the MySQL jar. I'm not going to add Hibernate at this time. I'll do that later. Whoops, I'm not. There it is. MySQL JDBC driver. And because we're building off an application that's already been written and does use the JSTL, I think, depending on how I structure these lectures, I think I may end up needing the JSTL code before we replace it with Struts. Struts has two components. It has the back-end processing, which are these things called actions and interceptors that replace the servlet, but it also has its own form building elements. So it has its UI, and it has similar kinds of iterator objects that we've been using in out of the JSTL. So it's going to replace a lot, almost all of what we've done in the previous assignment in terms of the add-on libraries, although it should be pointed out that you can mix and match struts and your old style depending on your preferences. But we'll get into all of that as we begin to move through the application. I am going to go ahead and do an add library for the JSTL. All right. Well, the first change will be made in the web XML, and this was a change which I have not seen everywhere that I looked for the Struts 2, but our authors, the Shaw book, says that the Struts 2 dispatcher has been deprecated, the file dispatcher, and they specify an alternative filter. And what the filter means is what part of the application is Struts going to manage and what part is it going to leave for, say, regular servlet kind of processing. And that's done in two steps. So the first step is to say, all right, what part of the Struts application do you want to do the filtering? And this is where the authors say that we should change from the org Apache Struts 2 dispatcher filter dispatcher. We should change that to have in the filter be ng dot. So after dispatcher, you do ng dot filter. Whoops, if I could spell it. Dot Struts prepare and execute filter. So you actually can take off the dispatcher name and change it to, in front of the word filter, we change it to Struts prepare and execute filter. Let me see if I can get that all the way down on one screen display here. And I'm recording this on the machine in my office, so it's got a smaller resolution than the machine in the classroom. I hope it's visible for everybody. If not, oh dear, I guess I'll have to record this again. But anyway, so what you want as the filter, the part of the Struts package which takes over and manages anything that you associate with the Struts operation, is this ng filter dot Struts prepare and execute filter. Okay, I think that looks correct. Now the filter mapping says, well, what are you really going to have this filter manage? And the URL pattern of /star means everything. So any action that is sent to or processed on the server side will be managed by the Struts framework. And the last thing we want to change is that the welcome file will not be a simple index HTML. We're going to bring down our logon JSP from the original application. So I'll pause there a moment and let you get that typing out of the way. And then we might as well go ahead and go up to our ClubDB, and in the web pages, grab the logon JSP and copy it. So I'm just going to do a straight right-click copy into the web pages area, right-click paste. So logon JSP is now available, and I no longer need index HTML, so I can right-click and delete that. Yes. Okay, well, since logon is very simple, we're going to start there with struts enabling our page. So let's go to logon JSP, and here's how we're going to do the change to make this a struts JSP, a struts-based JSP instead of what it was before. And the first thing is that we need a taglib to identify that we're using struts tags on the page now. And so that will involve a regular scriptlet designation, so at taglib, and the prefix for our struts will be S, the way we had, what was it, C, I think, for the JSTL core. We're going to have S for struts tags. And then we need to specify the resource that is providing these struts tags, and it is /struts. I don't seem to be able to type struts very well as I've been typing it here tonight. Struts tags. So the struts tags resource will be associated with the S prefix wherever we go. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to change our form so that it is a struts-based form. In other words, it uses a struts form tag, which is going to be necessary so that the action can be captured by struts. So all you have to do in this case is put S: in front of the word form, and you can see all of the other lovely things that many of which we'll get around to in due course. But these are the struts capabilities. And I'm going to leave the action as club logon. Method post is fine. But then you need to make sure that when you close the form that you use an S form close element. So we've now made our form a struts form, and in that form we can use a text field and a password entry that is generated by struts. So I'm going to dispense with the cookie business for now. We'll come back and look at that later on. So I'm just going to close out that value. But the other thing that's going on here is that the input tag for user ID is now going to be a struts text field. So instead of input type text, we go to S: and if you start typing, you'll find text field. So S text field, name user ID is good. ID isn't really needed, but you can have struts build the label, the associated label for you, so that we can specify here that the label equals member ID. And then you want to make sure, I think I've got a closing bracket hiding out somewhere around here. There it is. And you use a slash close for that bracket. So we've got a struts text field. Oh, and the other thing is that when you're doing struts form elements like this, having struts build your field, oh, I did call it user ID, didn't I? Well, I'll change from member ID to user ID. You don't have to have all of the cells and stuff that you had before, so I'm actually going to pull this out, take the TD away. I'm going to leave it in a TR. That doesn't hurt, so that the struts text field is built within a row of my table. But then I'm going to do the same thing down here for the password. And so that's going to be a struts password entity. And the name here is important. In fact, I changed the name to P attempt. So this is actually my password attempt. The ID is not that critical for us, but we'll go ahead and leave it in place. And then the label equal password. And then a slash closing bracket, and we don't need that TD down there. So I've changed my form to a struts form tag. My user ID is a struts text field, which will explode into an HTML item. Struts password entry, renamed it to password attempt. Labels are here. Then the last thing I will do is I will change from my regular type submit to a struts s:\submit. And the value field can still be used. It will generate a button with the word logon in the or on the button name. Okay, so my club logon page has been modified so that struts will build the page for me using its user interface elements. But you'll notice that I am keeping for the moment the normal expression language call to message. And that will show you, I want to do that intentionally, and we'll show you how that works when we get to our action, which is coming up. Now, I need some additional items in my source packages. So business will come first, so right-click and ask for a new Java package called business. And into that, I am going to pull the member object from my old application. So member.java in the original ClubDB, I'm going to right-click and copy that and bring it down into my business package in my struts version and paste it in. You can just do a straight copy. Refactor copy is not needed yet. Okay, and you'll know, did I say under the default package we do have a struts XML, which is our key template for how the application will be managed. But then the last thing that I want is a new package which will associate with these actions. So remember, actions are like servlets, and at least they have that functionality for them. So if we, I'm just looking at my notes here to make sure I haven't missed something and have to go off and copy it. All right, so new package, source package, right-click, new Java package, and I'm going to call them actions, whereas before we had servlets. Now we have actions. So that's just a package name. But the first thing I want to do is indeed build a login action which will take over when club logon occurs. So in the actions package, I'm going to right-click and ask for a new other. I'm going to go Other, and in the list, if you've added your plugins, you should have Struts 2 as something that contains things you can add to your application. And we want to add an action. Now there are two kinds. There's a raw or a simple action, and then there's an action that's based on the action support model. And this is kind of a long explanation, which I won't go into on the recording. We'll try and talk about it. But action support is a superclass that provides a number of features that makes the action class even a little simpler. So we're going to add an action class that is actually an extension of action support. And if you click Next, we are going to call this the logon. And it's just, notice it is a .java. It's a regular Java class the way a servlet would be a Java class, but this is now an action. And we'll click Finish on that. And you can see that it sets you up with a couple of important elements. The first being class name extends action support. It has an empty constructor that we don't have to worry about, but it also uses the import of xwork2.action support. So that comes from the action support extension. Right now it defaults to throw an exception. I don't have anything here, but we'll comment that out. And right now it's unhappy because it expects execute to return a string, and that string, we'll go ahead and give you one of them, return success. So that's a constant. So that's a all caps. It's a constant that comes from the action support superclass. So return success simply means the execute process ran at the appropriate time and produced success, and that will be managed then by our struts XML file. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so what happens when an action runs? Well, you already can see that it has an execute method rather than a constructor or something like that. The execute method will be called by the struts framework when it sees the club logon form action. But also, I don't know why it didn't do this itself. It wants to add an override annotation, and we should do that. Annotations are important in struts, and so the execute is an override of the execute method that is in the action support superclass. So we do want to do that. Now, there are some other things going on here, and this is the first fun part or useful part of struts. Struts will give us the ability to sort of automatically put data in variables from the form, that is, data from the form. So we only have two fields on the form. We have the member ID, which is called user ID on the form, and we have the password. And the password is a long as far as the object, the member object, is concerned. Well, we're going to declare several private global variables and then write get and set methods, because the struts framework will automatically call those if we name them the right thing. So the first thing I'm going to have is a private string called user ID. So there's my global. And I'm also then going to have a private, and I'm going to make it a string right now, and you'll see why when we get to the validation. A private string for p attempt, password attempt. Now those names are important because those are the element names that I made on my login JSP. So user ID is the name and p attempt is the name of the password. And so you want your globals to follow that naming convention, because we're then going to write public, so those were private globals. We're going to write public get and set methods. So we're going to do a public string get user ID, which will just return user ID. And then we're going to have a public void set user ID. And you do go to a capital U on the user ID because it struts follows the expression language rules. So when you're using shortcuts in the expression language, we did object name dot, and then if you wanted to call a get method, it was you throw away the get, and the first character, which should be an uppercase, becomes a lowercase in the expression language. The same kind of thing is going on with the syntax in struts, although struts has its own language, expression language in a sense that's different than the one we have been using. Okay, whoops, let's see. We need to set the user ID by receiving, a string. I'll just call it UID. And so the purpose of that is to set this user ID as UID. Okay, so we've got a global and a pair of get and set methods. And you will often find that coders put these globals and the get and sets that match up to the form, they put them at the bottom after the execute. It doesn't matter, of course, but that's another style that you may see. Okay, then we need a public string for the get of password attempt, which will return this password attempt. And then we need a public void set password attempt that receives a string PAT, password attempt, and sets the password attempt to match that. And so what we're saying here, as you will see shortly, is that struts, because of the names and because of the association that we're making between the JSP and the action, it will be able to run these methods, particularly the set method, on its own. And I guess that's cool. I don't know. It seems like there's a large learning curve on struts, and then when you're done, you think, well, did I get everything out of it that I really was supposed to? Has it made my life a lot easier? And I guess that's debatable. Okay, we have the methods, and I want to see in my execute if those values are in fact coming in. So I'm just going to do the following. In my execute method, I am going to create my message. Did I declare a message global? Oh, I don't have to declare it as a global, I guess. Let me see. I'm just looking at my notes here to see whether I bothered making it a global or not. No, it's not really needed as a global. Okay, so we'll just make a string message equal to, and I just want to send back to them their input. I just want to regurgitate it. So user ID equals this user ID, and then we'll add to that a space. Well, we'll bring it down here, and then password equals this dot password, and that's the password attempt. Okay, so we've created a string. Now the task ahead of us is to get this message string into the environment. So you're still going to be working with, at least underneath, you're still working with request objects, response objects, the session, all of that stuff that we used explicitly and directly in servlets is still there. It's just you have to get to it in a little different way, and some of the time you don't even have to get to it. Struts will take care of things for you. At least that's the goal. So what I want to do here is I want to get to the request object, and to do that I can't simply say request dot get parameter, because supposedly that's already been done for us. But I do want to put the message string onto the request object so that when I reload the login page, the message is displayed. So here we go. It's a map. The request object is defined as a map, and it's equal to a cast of the map. And here we go. We need the action context, kind of like the servlet context. We have action context, get context, dot, get, and then in parentheses the value that is the parameter to the method is request. So that will link us up to the request object once we do the imports that we need. So we're going to map has to have an import, so Java util map is added. And oh yeah, it did. The environment for some reason did an automatic add of the action support. Excuse me, I mean the action context. So that was a part of what we just did here, action context. Okay, so now I have the request, and I can put onto the request, just the way I would have before, the message. So I'm going to do a request dot put is the method, and I'm going to put MSG is, now this is the key or the name, if you will. So it's in quotes MSG, and the object is the string MSG. And then I'm just going to return success. So right now I just want to see, I'm trying to build it so the action does something. And all it does is it regurgitates the input, the user ID and the password. But you notice we never explicitly retrieved them. And that's what I've been trying to explain, probably not very well, is that these set and get methods are needed so that struts can itself call the appropriate method and fill the variables from the form. Okay, well, how do we put this all together so that the form works with the action? And the answer is we go to the struts XML file. So the manager, if you will, is there. So let's open up struts XML, and here's our definition or the configuration for the struts system. And the package default, struts default, is fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to make an action tag, and the action says that name equals club logon. Okay, so what we're saying is that when the system sees a form action of club logon, remember the way we did this with servlets, the servlet had to be mapped to intercept the form action. So the same thing is going on here, and here's the mapping. It's just not in the web XML file. It's in the struts XML file. So we've got club logon. When that action is seen, the class that takes over, this is like saying what is the servlet, the class is actions.logon. So it's supposed to run that class when the club logon action is seen. Now, here's the added, it's not just a mapping for that, it's also then where do you go? There's no forwarding technology the way we had in the servlet, but it's done here as a result tag. So what we're going to say is result, if the action, which is a class, so if the whole result of the action is a return of the constant for success. Now this is, the name is success, the global constant in the action class is success, capital S-U-C-C-E-S-S, but what the value should be is success. So when the result success is seen, we want to right now simply go back to the logon JSP. So that's the only thing we can do with this system the way I'm setting it up right now, is that when the action is finished and the action or the strut system looks at the result possibilities, if it sees success, it will go to the logon. In fact, we can go ahead and put in the other options, or at least one of the other options. If the name is error, then we can designate an error page. We'll just imagine that we have an error JSP. But that would have to be a return value out of the action.java program. And we don't have that return value yet, but we may eventually. Okay. Well, in fact, I'm sorry, while I'm here, let's just do the other one that we might need. Result. There is an input result. So if the system says, oh, there's an input, which usually means input problem, then that's also going to return to logon JSP. So right now we can only go back to logon JSP, or we can go to an error screen, which we haven't even built. But either a success or an input right now is going to return us to a logon. Eventually, a success will send us somewhere else, particularly to the member screen. But so I think now, if we walk back through it carefully, we've got the JSP, which is logon JSP, and it uses the struts tags for building. And remember, that's all run on the server side. So when a request comes in for ClubDB struts, the first page is logon. The server will run those struts tags, explode it into an HTML response object, and send it back to the browser. Then that JSP will go through a submit process, and club logon is the action. And that's where the struts filter says, oh, that's my responsibility. What do you want me to do with club logon action? And we've just told it, club logon action should run the logon class that's in the actions folder. And when that's done, you need to look at the result that came back. A success or an input sends us back to logon JSP. Okay. By having the action take the globals and put them back on the request object, when the JSP class reruns as a result of success, we should now have, the second time around, that MSG message string, and we're just using the regular expression language, nothing fancy, no struts needed here, because we put the MSG on the request object, it's being processed, the JSP is being processed, and so the regular expression language can work alongside the struts UI, and you should get the value displayed. Well, let's see if it happens. I'm going to set my starting project here, ClubDB struts, and we'll let her rip. Allow access, come on. I don't know why I'm getting that on this machine. Well, that's a good start. There's my club logon page you built with the struts tools. If you right-click and ask for page source, you can see that my struts text field was exploded into a label and a text input type with the user ID. And then my password was the same. It exploded it into two. The submit just looks like that. Admit an ID of club logon 0. Interesting. Okay. Here's my form ID. This was my struts form. club logon is the action, but it's actually changed that to be club logon.action and has the session ID with it. So that's an interesting change there. Anyway, let's see if it works. If we put in user ID A043 and password 123, oh, my submit button is all the way over here. Okay, I need to fix that. There's my logon all the way at the right. And I click that, and there you go. User ID A043, password 123. If I do it again, there you go. User ID came back. Hello world, password this is Paul, and that is because the execute method of the action is running as the interceptor, if you will, although interceptor is a keyword in Strut, so it's that's a whole other topic that we'll get to. But anyway, our logon action is doing its thing. And you'll notice that user ID and password attempt suddenly appeared with values even though we didn't do anything to extract and insert those values other than writing public methods that matched the names for the form fields. And that's going to be one of the powers of struts, is to be able to name your field elements on your form and have them automatically populate into a class structure. And you can even do that with data conversion type, conversion of different data types. So we could have made password attempt a long, since it is a long in member, and it would have taken the string from the form and done an automatic conversion to long. But I didn't want to do that on this page because we've got something else that we're going to do instead. Okay, well, we need to make some real functionality here rather than just regurgitating the input values. To do that, I am going to have the member class created, and I'm going to do an authentication based on the values that came in. And this is exactly the same thing that we did in the servlet. You can go back and look at the original servlet. We're just going to structure it a little differently. So to make this work, I'm going to come back up to the top of my logon action and create a private global that is a member object. Now, here was one of the big problems that I was having when I was working on this application and it wasn't working yesterday, and it got so late I couldn't hold class and do this lecture because it wasn't working yet. Anyway, when you have a POJO, a plain old Java object, which is nonetheless going to be associated with a form. Now, it's not really associated with the logon form. We could, but we're not going to do that. We're going to wait until the member update form. But when you have these objects that you're going to associate, the strut system wants the object name to match the class name, just in lowercase. So there was I couldn't find any documentation on this anywhere, and it was really just trial and error that finally the light went on. And I figured, well, maybe I should try my variable name as member lowercase, because my private or my object name is member uppercase, and that did the trick. The application fired up immediately. But I never saw that in any of the resources that I was checking. Anyway, we're ready to do an import on member. And that brought in business.member. So what we want to do now is in the execute method. So the execute is really kind of taking over the role of the regular servlet process, but there are going to be some other things that we can do that make it a little nicer. But if you think about execute, I know that by the time I got here, I had the user ID and the password attempt that was given to me from the form. So I'm going to comment this out. I don't really need a string message that says that. I tell you what, I am going to want to put a message on the request object. So I'm going to keep some of this code around. Let's just take string message equal quote quote, and the rest I'll make as comments. Okay. All right. So I do still have a string. I am going to want to map that string to the request object, but I need to do a lot of other fun stuff first. And the first thing I will do is I will instantiate my member. So this dot member, the global, will be a new member, and I will then set the ID and the password attempt. So I'm going to do a member set mem ID, and we'll set user ID. I guess it didn't care about the keyword this, did it? Okay, so user ID goes in as the member ID, and member set password attempt. Now it needs a long. Oh, and the other thing is I should change the name here, I think. Well, we'll come back to the whole issue of the member class in a minute. So set pass attempt as the long, parse long of this password attempt. Okay. So I've instantiated member, and I put the two values that I know from the form into that object, to that member object. Now I want to check on authentication. So how do we do that? Well, you could put the regular servlet code that you had. If we go back to the original application and look at our servlet and our club logon servlet, you can take all the code that did a JDBC call and a connection and pull the members and do the whole thing. You could put it in that execute method, and there's some logic argument for doing that, but an alternative, which I think does make some sense, is to move that code to the member class itself, which is a suggestion I saw in that Struts 2 in action book, and I kind of like it. Of course, eventually we want to incorporate Hibernate into our Struts application, so we won't even need to be doing this, and that's, I was thinking about trying to do it all together, and that's what also was slowing me down in getting this project underway. But so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab all of these code elements from my my club logon servlet, the old servlet. I'm going to grab the whole thing, down through the catches. So Control-C on that. And I'm going to come to my new project in member.java, and I'm going to add a new private method it doesn't have to return anything, I don't believe. So we'll just do private. Oh, let's return a Boolean. Private Boolean. What do we want to call it? Get DB data. Okay, so we're going to put this in the member class itself. And I'm going to just do a Control-V and paste all this code in, and then we'll fix it up because it's not going to be very happy for a while. Okay, so get DB data. Well, I actually need something that I don't have in member right now, and that is a message capability. So I actually am going back to the top of member, and I'm going to create a private string message and set it equal to, well, no, not do it there. Private string message, and then in the public member constructor, I'm going to set, well, it doesn't matter where it is, but somewhere, set message equal to the empty string. Okay, and then I'm going to need a way to get message, so let's have, I'll come down and put it towards the end. So I have is authenticated as a public Boolean. Before that, I'm going to say, all right, I've also got a public string get message that returns this message. All right. Because in my get DB data and my is authenticated, I'm going to make it possible that the messages are included. So message equals the empty string to start. And then as a part of the try catch, I don't obviously need user ID or password because those have already been posted into the object. I am going to do a connection using my variables from up above. I'm going to create a statement. I do need a string SQL, but while we're here, we ought to make this a prepared statement, shouldn't we? So let's do let's modify this a little bit. Darn, I don't have this in my notes. It just occurred to me. Okay, so string SQL will be member ID equal to question mark. And then our statement is not a statement any longer. It's a prepared statement. So let's, and that should, we should have the query first, I think. So let's bring this down. And it will now be a prepared statement PS equals con.prepared statement based on my SQL string. And I guess I need an import. That should be prepare statement, sorry. Okay, there we go. So import Java SQL prepared statement. And then we will set the parameter. So a PS set string, and the string is parameter 0, and the value is memID. Start at 0 in the prepared statement, or would you start at 1? Let me check this in a second. Let me look. In the old, we've got member update servlet, I think, had a prepared statement in it. Suddenly I'm not sure about that. Oh, we start at 1. Ah, okay. I wonder why it gave me a 0 as the default. It was confusing me. All right, back to member.java. All right, there we go. And so now the result set will be the execute query of the PS object, and if r.next exists, we need to set our password. So we're not building a member, we're already inside the member, and so we will be working on just raw object values. And so the password, so this dot password, not the attempt, that's already been put in the object. The password is going to be equal to the r get long of the password column. And then we can ask, is the object authenticated? We can set the authentication. In fact, we should well, you know, we don't even have to do that. This is a separate data element. So we got a record. Let's just go ahead and set data into it. I almost think I want to put the authentication steps in here, but maybe not. Let's see, what is it not like? Oh, I have an unreported exception for SQL exception. I thought I had that in my code. Oh, I must not have the import. Okay, well, we'll get there in time. So let's just set all the values. So if we have a next record, I'm just going to go ahead and put data directly into them. So this last name equals get string for last name, and etc. I won't bore you with talking them all through, but you can follow my typing here. Well, apparently I can't do any typing. Let's try that again. Middle name equals. Yeah, gave me a whole bunch of stuff here. Okay, get string for middle name. Status. Member date. Don't need the URL. Okay, so we're going to stop with that. But I have the question of the result. And let's create a Boolean result, and that'll be false. And so my get DB data will either return true if it found data. So if we have an r.next and we get through all of the pulling of data, we will set result equal to true. And do I want a message here yet? No. Okay. And then do we need an else message? No, message not yet, but well, we don't even need an else because the result is defaulted to false. So let's take out this and this all the way down to our catch. Okay, so we can catch a number format exception, in which case I'm, well, do I want, see, I really, yeah, I'm going to leave the message setting here. Let's go ahead and put a message in my r.next. So message is member ID found. That's all we're going to say right now. So we found the member ID. We don't need the BR stuff because that's not the way we're operating any longer. Okay, so the final step then is to return result. And the point is that this get DB data method has either filled the rest of the fields and said all's well by a result of true, or it found some additional problem and we don't even want to try to authenticate because there was an error. So let's, and we are returning messages. Okay. So I'm just pausing for a minute so you can go back through the code if need be to catch up with my typing. There are our usual connection strings, authentication, our try-catch, our connection object, prepared statement, fill the parameter on the prepared statement, try to get the result set, and if you found it, fill the rest of the data, and either everything member ID found and data added, or this isn't really an illegal password value. If we catch a number format exception, it could be, well, no, that's true. It's the only long in here is illegal password, so that's all right. And SQL exception. Okay. So what my proposal is that in the authenticated is authenticated, every time they ask for an authentication, I'm going to call getDBData. So I'm going to say if getDBData comes back true, then I'm going to check all this stuff. Otherwise, I return false. Okay, so oops, getDBData is a method call, so I need to put the method parentheses there. Okay, so let's walk through this. I may have one too many return falses. So if DBData says, yep, we're fine. Now, every time I'm asking for authentication, I'm going to be recalling the record, but oh well. So if password is greater than 0, then I can check for password being equal to the password attempt, which is already in the object. And if it is, I return true. Otherwise, return false. So yeah, I don't need this return false. I just put one at the end here. Okay. Because if we didn't get data, then I return false. Oh, but I do want to add, I do want to add one possibility on this else. So if the else is that I was okay on my data, it just didn't authenticate, then I'm going to do a message plus equal, but not authenticated, or member not authenticated. We'll just do it this way. Okay. So now the member object does its own database call when I ask for authentication after it's been created. So if we go back and look at logon.java, we build a member that's in the execute method. We set the values, and now we can ask, is it authenticated? Because we have enough code to say if member is authenticated, then we're good. Otherwise, well, in fact, let's just leave it at that. Otherwise, if the member get message isn't empty, so we'll put a not in front of this. If the member isn't empty, then I want to put that message on the request object. Whoops, so here's the code I wanted. Request put message. Okay. Now I actually can think about a couple of different things here. So what happens, oops, I put that in the wrong spot. I can't believe I just did that. I always want to put whatever message I might find from the member. Sorry, it needed to go in this second if. But here's the value. My structure is a little off here. Okay, hold on a second. I need to rework this in my code. I'm doing this a little differently than I did earlier. Okay, sorry about that. I'm gonna do it this way. Let's have a string that has my rval, return value, and it's going to default to error. No, it's going to default to error, which is to say the constant error. Now, if I'm authenticated, then rval can be reset to success if the message, and here I need to do an else. So we're going to say else if member get message is not empty. I just need to be setting my message here. So rval is success and message equals member dot get message. I still think I'm getting a little wrapped up in this needlessly. If member message is not authenticated and the message is not empty, then my rval equals input. And these constants go back to the action. And I'm going to return rval. All right, now let's walk through this again. I think I've got one more change to make. So my return val is going to be based on these global constants that refer to the struts XML result options, success, error, or input, even though we don't have different actions going on yet. So in logon, I start off with error as the default. If I find that the member is authenticated, then rval is success, and the message comes from the member. Otherwise, if the message is not empty, then I'm going to decide, well, it wasn't a success and I have a message here, so I'm going to assume I have to go back to the input. Only when I'm authenticated will I have a success result. And then I want to put message. I think I can do this in either case. All right, so let's bring this down here. Sorry, one more change. Serves me right. So we're going to put message as member, rather if it's not empty, I think this will be okay. We can just put message as member dot get message. Okay, so on the request object we will put the member's message, and we're just using the alternatives to change our result setting. So we default to error. If all goes through and we're authenticated, then the result is success. If we're not authenticated and there's a message here, then the return is input. Okay. Put the member message on the request object and return val based on these constants. Okay, now I think we're ready to test and see if in fact we can get an is authenticated result. But I'm not at all sure. We may blow up. That's actually running fairly well now. So if we do A043, but I give it a bad password. Oh, I didn't fix my logon. Aha! You have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual near question mark at line 1. Really? I didn't notice that. So obviously that's something I need to fix. Oops. So member let me take a look at my member code. Remember ID is question mark. Prepared statement PS. It's prepare statement. Set string 1 and the member ID. Oh, yep, sorry. This is the carryover when I switch from the old style connection and statement to the new. I've got a PS execute query in, I'm putting the SQL back in, but I don't want the SQL there. I want the prepared statement to run with its parameters. So that was overriding my parameter setting. So my line that was the result set equal, I had SQL inside my execute query and needed to remove that. Okay, now I think, but it's interesting that I was getting that far and it was giving me that message, putting that message in the message and came through. Let's try again. So we're going to try, well, let's try a member that doesn't exist and a password that doesn't exist, and that crashed altogether. The requested resource, oh, error. So that, oh, interesting, that threw an error. Okay, well, let's go back and we'll deal with that. So A043. Password that is wrong, member ID found and data added, member not authenticated. All right, that looks better. Now if I give it a password that is correct and I do a logon, uh-oh, member ID found and data added, member not authenticated. Didn't authenticate. Let's, we may have to debug this. Did I change the data on this machine? I forgot even to look at that. Let me just quickly check my database. Use club 294, select star from TBL members. Yeah, I had changed the password. Okay, so the password is 180 now on my machine. Let's try that one. Member ID found and data added, but I did not get my authenticated message. Let's see what happened. What might have happened here? Oh, of course. It's that code I was messing around with. It's a problem in the logon.java. Well, no, wait a minute. Let's see. Member. Oh, huh. I just returned a true if it was authenticated. I didn't add to my message. Okay, so I didn't even have it. So message plus equal and member authenticated goes there before I return true. Otherwise, I set not authenticated. And now I think we'll run it again and be in good shape. Let's see if I do an A 043 and I give it an illegal password, ABC. Oh, that crashed. Number format exception for input string ABC. Did I not have that working in a try-catch? It got to a parse long and blew up. Oh, you know what? I think I did that intentionally, and I didn't even mention it to you. Yeah, it's right here. Okay, so you can see that we can still crash the system if they gave us a bad value in our password attempt. I didn't do any try-catches in here on the execute. I just tried to parse it into a long and put it into the password attempt field in my member object, and that of course blew up. So that was a correct operation as well, and we're going to fix that when I meet with you all and start building on this. But let's go ahead and run it one more time. A043, correct password 180, member ID found and data added, and member authenticated. So there we go. Member is authenticated. I honestly don't know how long I've been talking at you. It may be maybe close to a couple of hours now. So let me do just a couple more things. The first one was to fix that silly little I'm sorry. I want to do two things on the form. So let's run it again. If I click logon, it crashes because there's bad data. But there is a nice little way around that aspect. And you can, on your login JSP, in your struts field, you can add, I'm going to bring these over a little bit so that it's still on one page, you can add the required equal true. So we will set required equal true on both of those. And that will not let the user post to the server until something has been put in the fields. Now on our submit, I wanted to do, oh, I didn't even put the submit, it's outside the table. So let's put the submit inside the table on its own row. So we'll add another row. And that, oh, that should be a closing TR. Okay. And I think if we do that, so that it's in its own row, it'll create, I think it will create a TD. If not, we'll build one for it. I think that'll bring it back underneath our other fields. But the main thing is I wanted to show the required equal true so that we can't submit, there we go, we can't submit an empty form. We try to do log on. It says, hey, please fill out this field. So that's an HTML capability. If you fill out one field and not the other, it still says, hey, please fill out this field. And we do a 180, and it says, oh yeah, you're authenticated. Very good. I think actually that I will stop here. So just to review again, we've got a struts enabled application. Struts XML is the controller file. You map actions to classes. So an action club logon, that is the action that logon JSP provides, runs against the logon class in the actions folder. We have these possible results. We don't have an error page yet. We probably should add one of those. I'll do that next time. And then we've got member, which can receive data and post or do its own database call and authentication. And the next issue, and I won't take time to go through it, but one of the problems we have is that after we have created our member and authenticated it, we have the same problem that we have in a servlet, in that where do we put the member? Right now I've shown you how to get to the request object, and we can put the message string on the request object, but obviously a member, an authenticated member, we want to put on the session so that it's available throughout the application. And so there'll be a technique for doing that inside the action class in the way you would, in a way similar to what you would do with a servlet. And then we'll be able to move onto the member update screen and show you how to map your object to the fields on a member update in a struts style. So thanks for sticking with me. Sorry I didn't get this lecture put together for yesterday, but I think you still got time to do it before next class. So we'll see you then.